For TTUTA, the issue of contract work persists in the education sector and is negatively impacting the attainment of national education goals. It is time that the Education Act be amended to have educators at the early childhood level be recognized as teachers and be brought formally into the education system. At a time when our students and their families are grappling with various challenges caused by the pandemic, the contracts for the majority of our school social workers who are in the student support services of the Ministry of Education will not be renewed when they end in July. The fact is that there are no kind of support mechanism provided by the state for our children. Teaching and non-teaching staff are now being asked to come out to schools which have not been assessed for safety after prolonged closure. This is completely unsafe. In addition, the Ministry of Education is still not filling vacancies. This is creating a high level of staff shortages. In spite of all of these issues affecting teachers, our country's educators are still working on 2014 salaries. Today, JTUM calls for the complete resolution of all these issues which are adversely impacting the education system.
Good day, Trinidad and Tobago. I'm Ozzi Warwick, General Secretary of JTUM and Chief Education and Research Officer of the Oilfield Workers Trade Union. You have just heard an excerpt from the Labor Day feature address delivered by the President of the Joint Trade Union Movement, Comrade Ansel Roger. You would have realized, of course, that that address had dealt with a wide range of issues, and one such issue is, of course, education. Well, we have with us the President of the Trinidad and Tobago Unified Teachers Association, Comrade Antonia De Freitas. Good day, Comrade De Freitas.
Good day, Comrade Ozzi. Good day to our listeners.
Well, you would have heard Comrade Roger raise a number of issues that are affecting the education system. And how do you and TTUTA respond to that?
Well, those are very critical issues, Comrade Ozzi, from health and safety issues as he identified to remuneration packages to the issue of contract work, which is a big bugbear within the sector. We talk about seamless education and achieving national education and the national development goals. But unless those pertinent matters are addressed, we will not be going anywhere anytime soon in achieving those goals or in achieving the Sustainable Development Goals of the UN for 2030.
So, I mean, these issues are live issues in effect. I mean, they are not, issues of a past era or past period, but this is what the educators are facing even as we speak. Is that not correct?
That is correct. For example, the issue of contract work. We have persons at the ECC level, as former President General mentioned, who are contract employees. Now, these people have been receiving fixed term contracts for as long as 15 to 20 years, or 2 years here, or 3 years here. What is happening now is that those same persons are being asked to apply for contracts for their positions, which are being advertised, and they're being given 1 month and 3 month contracts. Now, if we are serious that the ECCE level, the early childhood level, is the foundation of our system, and you have these trained and qualified persons, why are you not giving them tenure and making them permanent? We call them teachers loosely because they teach, but the state cannot recognize them as teachers because they are not on the schedule of educators within the Education Act. And Comrade Ozzi, that is a simple legislative change to make. It's not going to cost the state any additional funds right now to bring these persons onto the system because they're already being paid, albeit close to minimum wage salary. But you haven't served your nation for 20 years. Why are you still on contract and no chance of getting superannuation benefits when you retire? That is untenable. The issue of health and safety, Commodores, we are talking about that all the time. So our schools have been closed for a year, in some instances longer than a year. We want children to come out to do SCA, and up to yesterday, a principal is saying that water is pouring through the ceiling of a school compound in different places. What kind of school repairs, infrastructure repairs would be done and assessed by the necessary personnel to ensure safety when students come out to do these exams? The laboratories and the workshops that secondary school students have to use to do the CSEC and CAPE exams, comrade, some of those are in a deplorable state. The schools have not received funding to repair those. So God forbid something happens when those children go into the labs and the workshops. There's no maintenance plan for our schools. So we are asking educators, non-teaching staff, and students to risk their lives going into unsafe facilities, despite the requirements of the OSH Act. That is untenable.
Yeah, and I saw he raised this issue around social workers for the schools. And I found that that was an interesting point, because when you consider what has happened over the last year, the mental trauma as well, especially for young students and so on, I mean, one would have thought that an extra effort would have been put towards ensuring that we have strong support mechanisms.
Exactly, that mental stress, that those emotional things, the psychosocial impact of the pandemic on the students and their families requires that the ministry lend support. Now, I must say, TTUTA must commend all of the officers of Student Support Services Division, the school social workers, the guidance officers, the special educators who have been doing yeoman service. But the school social workers are the ones who will reach out to the students with those mental and emotional traumas. If you are not going to renew their contracts and you have not factored them in to that recovery program for the education system, how do we expect our children to adapt to what we've been calling the new normal? How do we expect our children to perform going forward after all of the psychosocial impact? So that is something the ministry must address. You cannot have these persons in limbo and say we're not going to renew the contract. But again, it's hindsight. It's not foresight and planning. And TTUTA has said repeatedly, make sure your plans incorporate not just infrastructure, money for building schools, money for repairing schools, money for internet, but all of these other human resources to support the education sector.
And as you mentioned, human resources necessary to support the education sector, I'm also thinking of the point he made around filling vacancies, because I mean, the last thing you want is to have a teacher with 50 students. So if you want really quality education, one would think you need, smaller classes, and therefore you would require more teachers. Did I misunderstand that?
No, you are quite correct, Comrade Ozzi. The reality is each school has a certain number of administrators and a certain number of teachers as assigned by cabinet. And what has happened over the last few years is that, as Comrade President General said, those vacancies, especially in secondary schools for heads and deans, have not been filled. So people have not been appointed permanently to those positions. What many secondary schools have had to do is ask persons to volunteer their services, but they don't have the real authority. Now let's take the dean in a secondary school. The dean of a secondary school is responsible for discipline, maintaining student discipline and student morale. If you don't have the adequate number of deans to assist the educators, the teachers, the form teachers, then you're gonna have a breakdown in discipline. And we are seeing that. But there's no real reason given for why such vacancies are not being filled. The Teaching Service Commission and the ministry started the process and it stopped because of the pandemic. So you still have a number of positions pre-pandemic situation of vacancies not being filled, of persons not being promoted, not being given increments, that are stymieing persons and demotivating educators. So when educators leave the sector, that brain drain that takes place, how do we recover from that? it's not motivating to come into the teaching service right now, to come into education.
And of course, that will have a major impact on building a nation, negative impact, in fact, on building our nation. Now, as we close off, TTUTA has really been a critical institution on the landscape of Trinidad and Tobago, in that it represents, to me, one of the most important groups of people, that's teachers. Teachers have such an incredible impact on the lives of so many people, on all of us, whether it's through preschool, primary, secondary. What would you say as part of your closing remarks? Because the theme for Labor Day was Unite to Fight. What should we as a country unite to fight for with regards to education?
As a country, Ozzy, we have to look at recovery of our education sector after this pandemic and to plan resilience going forward to deal with any other similar scenario, devastating scenario. So therefore, we will have to unite to fight around the common cause of valuing education and valuing educators, not only in terms of compensation, attitudinally in terms of the work that they do. As a public, one of the first things some of us want to do, teach us home and we're not doing anything, cut their pay. But it takes a lot for an educator to interact with the class and balance their own family. It takes a lot for educators to sit down and plan the curriculum to reach the individual child, especially those children who learn differently. So unite to fight in the context of educators and in the context of education will have to be everybody coming on board to ensure that what we do, one, allows equity for our students, allows fair wages and terms and conditions for educators, and allows for achievement of national development goals through education.
Thank you very much. I think that's a powerful message for our country. So let me just take this opportunity on behalf of the Joint Trade Union Movement, the labor movement in general, and even on behalf of the general public, to thank our nation's educators for the human service that you continue to do to help build a great nation. Thank you very much. That was the president of the Trinidad and Tobago Unified Teachers Association, Comrade Antonia De Freitas, speaking to us and responding to the Labor Day feature address by Comrade Ansel Roche. Thank you very much, Comrade De Freitas.